Before that, I was the teacher at Lawrence High School for 22 years. I taught English and humanities, and I really consider myself a teacher mainly. That's what I know how to do and what I love doing. Is there anyone here who's never been to the Lawrence Arts Center? That's great. I recognize many of you from there. Stan, of course, from Lawrence High School. Others of you from around Lawrence. I wanted to tell you a little bit about why I want to work at the Lawrence Arts Center and why I think it's so important. What I was really more interested in than art, and what really attracted me to the Lawrence Arts Center, because it's not a well-kept secret that I really don't know that much about art, except that I've learned a lot over the last 3 years. What really drew me to the Lawrence Arts Center is this. It is a community gathering place. What I loved about teaching at Lawrence High School, community gathering place. What I love about where I live, community gathering places, where our garages aren't attached to our houses and we're passing one another on the street and looking at each other's windows all the time. I really like it. I like that level of connection with children and the identity we have with one another where we live. The Lawrence Arts Center is open, equal access to all children, all families, all takers from around Lawrence and from around the world. The Lawrence Arts Center is the intersection of scholarship, social mission, social service, art, and education. All four of those things come equally into play there, and while the building is owned by the City of Lawrence, the Lawrence Arts Center itself is a private nonprofit organization. So we run our own budget. We have a budget of about $1.8 million. We raise 94% of that every year on our own. 6% of our budget comes from the City of Lawrence. We apply for it, and we usually receive that amount, about $115,000 from the City of Lawrence. The rest of it is ours to raise or not raise. We mostly raise it through tuition for classes, but a large part of it is raised, about 33%, through donations, foundations, corporations, individuals in Lawrence. People are very generous. They know that place is kind of ours to lose or ours to cause to thrive, and people have really stepped up to make certain the Lawrence Arts Center, which is now in its 38th year, is going strong and is sustainable into the future. So that's how we fund ourselves, just in case you're wondering. We're not like the library or Parks and Rec. We're independent, although the city does own the Lawrence Arts Center building. We only do 3 things there. If you look at our website or receive our catalog, which I hope you do both often, it will seem like we do a lot more than 3 things, but they're all one of 3 things. They are contemporary exhibitions in 5 gallery spaces, performance, theater performance, dance performance, film, lectures, so everything in the realm of performance. And the third thing we do is arts education, visual and performing arts education. We start with preschoolers in our arts-based preschool, which is invented by Linda Raymond, who's an award-winning preschool teacher. And we continue with a fully articulated curriculum in visual and performing arts for preschoolers, elementary schoolers, junior middle school, and high school. And as Bill said, one of the amazing things about the Lawrence Arts Center, and I'm kind of new there, so I feel like I can really brag about what happens, is that a child can take a sequentially more rigorous curriculum, beginning early as a dancer, for example, or a painter, or an actor, or a sculptor, or a ceramist, and follow this sequential curriculum based on national standards through high school and wind up with a portfolio of work that complements what public and private schools are giving kids right now. But also, you or I or any kid could start at the Lawrence Arts Center as a beginner in any medium at any time. And juggling both of those things, that artistic excellence and a sort of an arts institute, which we have for middle school and high schoolers, juggling that track while maintaining openness, complete democratic access for all beginners and experimenters, is really quite a feat. Not too many places pull off, and I'm super proud of that. And for adults, I think of it as like a thin place in the world, like where fairies come and go, or gnomes or something like that. A thin place between 2 worlds, because adults often, I would say at least every week, I hear some adult tells me, I'm kind of putting my toe back into the water here. This is the place I'm doing it. You know, I used to dance. I used to make pottery. I used to paint before life intervened. I used to be in shows. I used to play music. And this is a reentry place. And so if you have ever said to yourself, I wonder if I still can ballroom dance, you know, do yoga, I wonder if I still can paint, the Lawrence Art Center is a great place to answer that question. So I love it. There couldn't be more happy. So we have come back from a very dire financial situation at the Lawrence Art Center. When I first took this job, a guy many of you will know, whose name is Bill Carswell, was our board president. And they hired me because they thought the Art Center was going to be open for probably 6 to 9 months. And I didn't really know what I was doing, and they didn't really have anything to lose, and they couldn't afford to hire anybody else. So I took the job. And I am so glad I did, because what I found is that when this community realizes what it has, it's willing to invest. And this really connects to creative placemaking, which is the topic of my talk today. And I didn't realize, and I venture to say almost nobody else realized, how difficult the financial situation was at the Lawrence Art Center. But we have been putting into place a really good business plan that I think is working. It is always a hustle. I mean, it is always a hustle to make it work. We have about 150 contracted employees every year. Yes, every year. They paint sets, they design lighting, they choreograph shows, they hang paintings, they spackle walls, they teach classes. And it is always our mission to hire artists when we can. So of those 150 contract employees, all of them are artists. We don't pay very much, but for some families, we're the difference between being able to afford to stay in a creative field a little bit or having to leave a creative field entirely. This is also connected to creative placemaking. For some individual artists, we are the difference between being able to continue to stay in the world of creating and not. For some families, the difference between being able to stay in Lawrence and not. So while our salaries are not high, for about 150 people a year, we're doing everything we can to keep them engaged in creative fields. We have 13 full-time employees who are keeping the place running all the time. So that's kind of a sketch of what happens at the Lawrence Art Center. I will say that the reason I'm here today to talk about creative placemaking is because the Lawrence Art Center is in a town that has been investing in creative placemaking, at least for the life of the Lawrence Art Center, which is 38 years and more. I have several points I'm going to make today. One is what is creative placemaking? It sounds like what it is, really, but I'm going to give a definition, a history of creative placemaking, some challenges and concerns related to this, which is really a grassroots movement across the country. And then fourth, what's happening here in Lawrence that falls under creative placemaking? What is this cultural district, and kind of where are we going with it? And I would love to be interrupted by questions. I was a high school teacher for a long time, and I feel very comfortable that way. The National Endowment for the Arts, which is, you know, America's version of a kind of a cultural cabinet, if we were to have one, which is tremendously underfunded. But the National Endowment for the Arts often takes the lead in American artistic endeavors. Also, their imprimatur on arts organizations is very important. About 4 years ago, under the leadership of Rocco Landesman, who was the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts until recently, they started a movement called creative placemaking. They were working in conjunction with the major private foundations across the country, also with the Department of Health and Human Services and the federal government, to determine what makes a place people want to linger. Why do you go to a place where you can sit on your front porch and watch people walk by? Why would you be in a place like where I live, where your garage isn't attached to your house? Why would you stand around at night in Massachusetts or walk from New York School to the river? Why would anybody do these things? it really happened kind of coincidentally with an important discussion in Lawrence about neighborhood schools, which is a point I'll bring up in just a minute, and it's also related to creative placemaking. The National Endowment for the Arts commissioned a study. I'm actually going to give you the executive summary of the study before I go. But in this study, they defined creative placemaking in the following way, and you'll have it in the study when you leave. In creative placemaking, partners from public, private, nonprofit community sectors strategically shape the physical and social character of a neighborhood, town, city, or region around arts and cultural activities. Creative placemaking animates public and private spaces. I love that word, animate. It animates public and private spaces, rejuvenates structures and streetscapes, improves business viability and public safety, and brings diverse people together to celebrate, inspire, and be inspired. That's a very broad definition of creative placemaking. I would say that anytime you've ever traveled to a city and wanted to stay in a hotel where when you walk out the door, you're where it's happening, that's the creative place in that city. It's a place you know there's going to be an animated streetscape, as they say in creative placemaking. People are on foot, on bike, they're stopping, things are at street level so you can look at them and you want to linger. It's a little bit about art, but to tell you the truth, in creative placemaking, art is the input. It's not the output. All of the foundations that are granting money to arts organizations based on creative placemaking, they're looking for artistic excellence. But the outputs that they're measuring, and these are hard to measure, are things like hope, vibrancy, diversity is a little easier to measure, events, people lingering in a place, numbers of creative patents that are issued in a zip code, for example. They measure cell phone activity to see where people are hanging out. Interesting. They look for how many people are going to a neighborhood street party. How many people are going to the school party? Are people walking to the school or neighborhood school staying open? These are signs of vibrancy. They're measured by people, activities, and also by money spent. Creative placemaking, and it shouldn't be overlooked, creative placemaking has an economic driver, and that is that there are more jobs in a creative industry in a place that's creative and vibrant, and that people are spending more money there. On art, yes, but going out to dinner in independently owned stores, these are the measures of successful creative placemaking. There are some challenges to creative placemaking. What has happened in Lawrence is that over a period of years, the city and private developers have invested in very important cultural anchors in a very small footprint. The footprint is 0.78 a square mile, as the city has defined it. So it goes from, in fact, I'll go ahead and, do you want to take one and pass it on? This is a cultural district map, so I'll just refer to that for a little bit. So this is really cool. In Lawrence, we have invested over a period of years in cultural anchors that are between Kentucky, there are others, but many between Kentucky Street and the railroad tracks or Delaware, between the Kansas River and 15th Street. That's the footprint you're going to see on this map. I think there's 30 of those. There should be plenty. We generated this map at the Art Center. The 0.78 refers to the 0.78 of a square mile in there. And hey, it is not finished. I mean, it's just a work in progress. It is meant to eventually involve walking maps, online maps, some versions that have artist studios on there, some versions that are just history-based, all of it. Okay. But if you look at that map, or just run through your mind the cultural institutions that are in that area, you're going to see that Lawrence has done more to invest in cultural institutions than almost any city. I don't even mean city our size, but bigger cities. I don't even mean like other Big Ten cities or other Midwestern cities, just more than almost any other city, mid-sized cities, on an ad hoc basis and a kind of catch-as-catch-can basis. A good example of that is in the development that's now in the 800 block of Pennsylvania Street. That place is going to have $30 million or so of federal money, millions of dollars of city money, and a lot of private investor money. And it's developing around a reputation as an art, kind of an arts place. It's called the Warehouse Art Block. It's on this map. The Lawrence Art Center is here. The Lawrence Preservation Alliance has invested in Turnhalla and hopes to turn it into a community culture space. The Public Library investment, Freedom's Frontier, Van Gogh Mobile Arts, Langston Hughes Church, and the site of one of his former boarding house where he lived. And then the William Burroughs Trail has either its beginning or its current terminus right at this district. And of course our downtown. And I'm just scratching the surface right now. So what we have on a kind of a random overtime basis is tremendous investment in creative and cultural and historical infrastructure. What we believe is possible is to take the next step and create an identity for this space. That is creative placemaking. So I'm going to back up a little bit, but you have this kind of picture of Lawrence in mind. The challenges to creative placemaking are forging partnerships, getting the financial investment, addressing fears of displacement and gentrification, failure of leadership, failure of will. These are challenges to creative placemaking that happen all over the country. They're written about in the paper I've given you, which also has an extensive bibliography attached to it for those of you who are really interested in it. They're serious challenges, and in Lawrence, one of the things we've been discussing a lot is fear of displacement and gentrification. And that is on a discussion that's happening on an ongoing basis. The neighborhoods that are connected to this cultural district are downtown Lawrence and the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association. And both of those bodies have been well represented and will continue to be in all discussions related to creative placemaking and related to the cultural district. Last night at the City Commission meeting, Mayor Shum appointed a task force of 8 people, which is heavily represented by East Lawrence Neighborhood, Downtown Lawrence, artists, the Art Center, and some businesses. And this task force is going to take as its task over the next 6 months, but as a limited time, to look into what is happening in cultural districts around the country. Because there are models that have measures in place to ensure affordability for artist studios, ensure affordability for longtime residents. So what's happening in East Lawrence right now is there's great investment happening. So the neighborhood is changing. It's just changing without a plan. Neighborhood plans, yes, but it's changing without any big look at its connection to larger space. The kind of border wars that happen on New Hampshire Street as building continues there will all be addressed as the city looks at what could a cultural district be like, what models are out there, and what might fit us. Okay, so the National Endowment for the Arts began this movement known as creative placemaking. They began to give one big grant a year based on how well a town is moving in the area of investing in arts and culture with a cultural plan. And you go to the NEA and you would say, here's what we'd like to do. And they ask the question, how does this fit into your community's larger portfolio of strategies for creative and economic development? And there's a big gap here, because in spite of our consistent investment in culture in Lawrence, we have no strategic plan for cultural investment. So if we're just putting dollars against dollars on what other communities are doing, it's very impressive. But if we are trying to answer the question, how does this particular project, say a film festival or something like that, fit into your community's larger portfolio of strategies, that's where there's a gap and we're not competitive. So that's one of the reasons for moving toward this cultural district idea. Our town, we've applied again this year. That's an NEA grant. It's based on creative placemaking. It's meant to push organizations and cities to collaborate. So what you see on the cultural district map is a group of entities who have really started to have a discussion together about how we can make a greater impact working together. An example is this. Bill Tuttle has been working with Verdell Taylor at St. Luke's AME. They'd like to have a walking map. Steve Nowak at the History Museum would like to also have a walking map. The Douglas County Community Foundation and Live Well Lawrence would like to have shared use pathways in this, so wide enough for bikes and wide enough for walkers. The East Lawrence Neighborhood Association has documents sitting in the public library that are 40 years old asking for passable sidewalks and lighting. Okay, but none of these groups really felt like there was a common interest or really spoke to one another. And the idea of the cultural district is that these groups come together and ask for, it's partly for economic development, it's partly for art, it's partly for culture. Ask for the shared use pathways. Continue the Burroughs Trail, just as an example. Also, yesterday we passed a bond issue in this town that is going to make sure, among many other things, New York School gets the repairs it needs, right along the lines of creative placemaking. So our town, in many ways, is affirming, like, we believe in this. We believe in it. And the cultural district concept is a way, we think, to bring entities together that might not have that much power on their own to get something done in the name of creating an identity for this district, and one that we can really be proud of. Downtown Lawrence is a little concerned about all the investment at the Warehouse Art District. Well, I think sitting outside at the bar at Pachamama's, which is a great place to sit, on 8th Street, you ought to be able to look down the sidewalk toward Pennsylvania Street and see a passable sidewalk at night. That you could push a wheelchair down, you could push a stroller down, and it doesn't look too scary. I don't think it's scary. But, you know, people come from other parts of the state or town, and they're not sure they want to walk on 8th Street from New Hampshire to Pennsylvania. So this is just like the talking. Yeah.
I'm just curious on that. How has Sam Brownback not supporting the arts in Kansas?
Retta teaches at the Lawrence Art Center. And she's an artist. Douglas County, until Sam Brownback eradicated the Kansas Arts Commission, entities in Douglas County, including entities at the university and just out in the county and in town, received about $205,000 spread among them each year, around that, just over $200,000. So many of them are located right in this footprint. So I would say probably 100,000 of that located right in this footprint. The Art Center was maybe 20,000 of that. I'll tell you what that has done. And Sam Brownback's decision to defund the arts in Kansas has had one effect that I know of. It has really drawn attention to organizations in Kansas that are doing everything they can in spite of that. We applied for a creative placemaking grant from a foundation, a conglomerate that is of foundations known as Art Place. 3,000 entities applied. They chose 105, and the Lawrence Art Center and Lawrence are in that one remaining 105. We positioned ourselves as leading a discussion in the state that has no funding for art. We called the project, which we may very well not receive the grant, but we are a finalist. We called the project Free the Radicals, and it was about art and the voice for art in a state that is kind of shutting down voices. This is what I really think defunding the arts is more about. I think it's much more in common with not funding public radio than it has with anything else. So our project is Free the Radicals, and we say, you know, in a town that was home to Langston Hughes and William Burroughs, we want to ask this question, like, not nostalgically, but looking forward. What's the 21st century version of this radicalism, and how can we position artists at the front of a creative placemaking movement? That's the project. Most creative placemaking grants, the NEA grants, the Art Place grants, tend to go to places where there's no art. They're going into a barren wilderness, urban areas. Our grant proposals are different. What they're saying is we're not barren of art. We have a great deal of investment now, but we're on a trajectory, and we feel like an investment from our place or the National Endowment for the Arts could really bring us together and help us take the next step forward. And so we're kind of positioning ourselves, this is Lawrence, we have an opportunity here to look back at a radical path that mostly moved forward. We lose money because of him. It's impossible to quantify what the state loses in terms of reputation, and people won't even think about moving here, but we're trying to use it. We're trying to work that angle. So the NEA starts this movement, found the big foundations, the Kresge Foundation, the Knight Foundation, the Ford Foundation, they're all catching on to the idea of creative placemaking and offering grants for it. And Art Place is a consortium of these foundations. They're offering major grants. They've given, I think they have given, I'm losing the number now, $40 million away to 70 organizations in 2 years, something like that. They're big grants. They're meant to have maximum impact and really not nickel and dime people to death. Art Place is considered the public or the private cousin of the National Endowment for the Arts. They are both started by Rocco Landesman, who used to be the chairman of the NEA. Okay, so then it comes to Kansas again, and Retta, this is kind of to your point. We don't fund the arts anymore, but just now, in the last few months, really, the Kansas Department of Commerce has had in its budget $700,000 to spend in a new commission, which is meant to replace the Kansas Arts Commission in a way. But it's located in the Department of Commerce. So the Kansas Arts Commission used to be its own department. That's kind of connected to the idea of creative placemaking, which is that art's the input and the output is measured economically. They have that money in the budget now. A guy named Peter Hasso runs the agency. And his goal, was on the steering committee for this, the goal is to get the National Endowment for the Arts to match that money. So when we lost our state arts agency, we lost the national match. It's a tiny version of healthcare situation. We couldn't get the federal money. So we lost about $700,000 from the government. We're the only state to have that position. Now we have in the Department of Commerce the Kansas Creative Arts Industries Commission. And they are hoping to get their $700,000 matched by the NEA, and they give grants for creative placemaking. So kind of to pull it all together, in 2009, the NEA invents creative placemaking. They commission a study, they describe what it is, they begin to fund projects related to it. Major foundations around the country catch on. Art Place gets formed because Art Place gives the big money away without the burden of reporting that the NEA has. And now, Kansas, in the Department of Commerce, has taken on creative placemaking. If you look at the Kansas Department of Commerce website and see how to apply for their grants, you're basically reading what I'm going to give you, which is this creative placemaking white paper. How can you use art to revitalize, invigorate, or create greater economic impact in a community? With the City of Lawrence, the Lawrence Arts Center, and Callahan Creek have applied for a grant, $75,000 grant. The requirement is 3 entities have to apply together, the municipality, a nonprofit, and a business. So we took the lead on that with the city. We're submitting the grant, I think, on Friday. And it asks for $75,000, which is the most you can ask for. And should we get it, the idea would be that we hire a consultant for a little bit of it to come in and bring all these entities together across Lawrence to talk about cultural planning. Then we dig into the cultural district idea, and then we wind up with some marketing. So again, the city, Callahan Creek, and the Lawrence Arts Center are working together on that, should we get the grant. So that's kind of how creative placemaking has found its way through both the governmental systems, national and state, the nonprofit world, and major foundations around the country. What we decided to do in Lawrence is do an asset inventory of what we already have and make the argument that we are ready to identify, not just as an artsy place, or not just kind of like an old-timey, Lawrence is so artsy compared to the rest of the state, but like a serious plan that will have economic impact, because that's the measure. If before I close and just take any questions you might have, I'll say this actually presents a problem for an arts organization, because one of the main things we need to be doing is supporting the creation of art, whether it makes any money or not. That's a disconnect from the requirements of creative placemaking. So we need, at the Art Center, to support the creation of plays and dances and visual artwork that maybe doesn't have a market. So we really don't want to be corrupted entirely by market influences. We really want to say, we're going to do this, and this is a good place to do it because we're a nonprofit and it doesn't have to sell. So while we're willing to enter into the marketplace, and we're willing to make the argument that art is a very important investment, that we can create a greater economic impact through cultural tourism, for example. We can help the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association have a bigger impact on what they wanted to do anyway, or the Community Foundation, or Live Well Lawrence. We can make it a better place for artists to live and to work. We can even measure, if we get a cultural district going and the sidewalks are improved, what happens to kindergarten enrollment at New York School over 2 decades? Those are serious and important measurements that have an impact, and we're taking the lead on it. But I don't want to overlook the fact that our primary mission is really to give artists a place where they can create work, where Rick Averill can direct a play, and we don't think it's a failure because we didn't sell all the tickets. That's crucial, and we're going to continue to do that. So those are 2 different fronts on which we are operating. I think I'm done. That last part is my own philosophy, and I think very important consideration. So, any questions about Rick Averill or creative placemaking? Or Lawrence? Oh, yeah.
What will be the influence on this entire plan of the economic development that's going on right next to the Art Center, all of the hotels and high-rises that are going to kind of close in around your space?
Yeah.
Do you see that as an advantage or a disadvantage?
What is the impact on this plan or on the Art Center of the development that's about to happen at 9th and New Hampshire?
On both sides?
Both sides, tall buildings and their hotels. Density is really, I'm in favor of it. It's good for the Art Center. I think it's good for the neighborhood. I can make a distinction, though, between, for example, Hobbs-Taylor lofts, another block down, where people have bought their places and they live there and they feel invested in whether there's a school and a restaurant and an art center, and people who live in the new building above the gym who have rented. And then the next level down of benefit to any of us is people who are coming to stay in a hotel. So I don't feel great about a hotel next door to the Art Center. I'm slightly concerned about a kind of a canyon effect as you look down the street from the north and you can't even see the Art Center. What is happening now is that artists and creative people are the last people anybody in city planning wants to hear from. They always come in with a complaint at the end, but they're never invited at the beginning. And so our thought is that a successful leadership on the part of arts organizations, and this is really the thrust of our Arts Place grant, is to reposition visionary creative people at the beginnings of discussions. The cultural district, as you see it, has nothing attached to it. It's got no teeth. There's no zoning change. There's nothing. And yet, if it's done right and there's good leadership with it, I think it can make it more clear that there is a great deal of value to be gained by including creative people early on in discussions. That's what I hope happens. That would be the best outcome. Yeah.
Would you agree that Lawrence is probably among the top 3 art places in the state of Kansas?
Yes. Would I agree that Lawrence is one of the top 3 art places in the state of Kansas?
Who would be crowding us?
Crowding us, good. There's a very vibrant art scene in Kansas, Kansas City, especially on the Missouri side, but on the Kansas side as well. Topeka got some notice in the New York Times maybe 6 months ago for what they've done downtown with the North Topeka Arts District. And they've really, they just moved forward. They didn't get admired in a lot of bureaucracy. They just did it and taken the lead by some artists there, and it's kind of nice. I think, I'm on a Johnson County Art Council, and we think in terms of a region. So we think about, for example, the Spencer Art Museum, the Lawrence Art Center, and the Nerman Museum, which is in Johnson County, as kind of, the distance is so small. You might as well drive from the Spencer Museum to the Nerman Museum as from the Spencer Museum to the Nelson Atkins Museum, or the other way around. So we think about, we kind of think about it like that in a bigger geographical area. Or in this whole I-70 corridor, which picks up Topeka and Lawrence and Kansas City. Yeah.
Why isn't it an advantage to have a big hotel down there with a lot of people wandering around looking for something to do at night?
The question is, why isn't it an advantage to have a big hotel down there with a lot of people? I think it's a great advantage. I think it's good to have people coming in and out of our doors. It's good to have the street vibrant. It's terrific. I was just answering the question about, if you compare longtime residents to apartment dwellers to hotel visitors, for us, hotel visitors don't rank as high as longtime residents. But absolutely, the investment, the density. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Don't you want to attract tourists?
Yes, we do. Not against the hotel. Not against the hotel. Yes.
What were some of the other model cities that you looked at, and what were the things that you were drawn to, or that you were kind of steering away from in terms of the gentrification question? And
The task force, which the mayor appointed last night at the city commission, hasn't started yet. However, we've looked at the Art Center. We've looked all around the country, and we chose the cities we look at. The question is, what other cities have we looked at? And we went to see art place projects in Chicago, in Providence, Rhode Island, in Los Angeles, in New York. And those really work because they're not bigger areas than 0.78 square miles. And I would say that Lawrence has the kind of sophistication and investment that those neighborhoods, like those creative districts and those places, those projects, work as comparisons for us.
And if you compare it with what we discovered by accident, when you're in Wyandotte County, this is blue collar, and nobody, you don't talk about these things. You're lucky if you have money to buy food with, and the stockyards are there, and we stumbled onto this after we had decided up here that the little house was nice, and then we don't know what was the rest of it. Forget about art. You worry about survival.
right.
That's not necessary to make that choice. But it was a culture that we stumbled into, and fortunately had wheels and got out of there and went over to the art in Kansas City.
Right.
The museum that they had.
It's amazing. A lot of art place investment has gone into neighborhoods like that. Yeah.
I know that input is critical.
Yes.
And the output is an economic advantage. Do you know? I know that there's an enormous art output also.
Yes.
And that it creates a financial reward. Are artists doing well in Lawrence in terms of supporting their own personal incomes through art, or do we have a typical community full of struggling artists?
Artists struggle to sell work in Lawrence.
In Lawrence.
Yes. We have a number of artists.
Too much? Is it too many?
I don't think people in Lawrence buy much original art. we have artists in Lawrence who make a living selling art, and they sell very little of it in Lawrence. They're represented by galleries in other parts of the country.
Or markets, or free markets, or
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
But a goal of this would be to sell more art.
Yeah, no, that's my point.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm
Yeah.
curious, you said you thought you were gonna be temporary, didn't you?
When you started at the
You thought
art
it was gonna
center.
be a short-term
That it was
job?
6 to 9
Did I
months.
say that today?
Yeah, you said
I
that
think
they,
so.
Right.
We
I
have it
thought,
on
okay.
tape.
And-
He didn't say you thought that, he said
I'm
they
curious.
thought
I
that.
said, thank you. I thought the art center was going out of business. I didn't think I was
Yeah,
gonna
that's
quit.
what I meant.
Yes, okay.
What caused it not to go out of business? What forces
Well,
or
her
whatever?
force.
What happened?
Here's the deal. The only thing I had really ever done before except teaching was raise money. I was on the board of the Spencer Art Museum, which I loved, and Van Gogh Mobile Arts. Van Gogh Mobile Arts had a capital campaign, which I led to renovate their building at 7th in New Jersey. I do not mind asking people for money, and I did. I knew how to do that. I asked everyone I know for $1,000. I got in my car and I drove to Hill's Pet Nutrition, where I had an appointment with the then CEO, Neil Thompson. I'd met once. And on my way there, I thought, well, I'll ask him for $35,000 because it's our 35th anniversary. And they said yes. They've been very supportive of not only the Art Center, but other places. And I just began to tell the story. We also made some cuts. We used to have a professional dance company, and that was really untenable. We had a couple of positions that I cut at that time. We're filling back in a little bit, but we weren't doing anything our business supporters weren't doing in 2009 and 10 because of the economy. We were making cutbacks. They were supporting. Individuals were supporting. We rely on donations and tuition sales, but we rely heavily on donations. And people began to step up. And once they stepped up, we got a little bit out of a survival mode. We got into big thinking mode. That's what's so important about being able to count on donations over a period of time. Because if you're in survival mode, you can't think like this. So people are generous. Yeah,
Tell us a little more about the warehouse arts district.
I will.
That seems to be a relatively new development.
Yes, it is. There's a building that's over 100 years old that's just at 8th and Pennsylvania, just really 8th and Delaware, just east of Pennsylvania Street, called the Polar Building. It's had artist studios in it. You might have been in it over a period of years. A private development group from Kansas City bought it, and they renovated it. They had about $15 million in federal tax credits for historic rehab, and then they had another millions of dollars for subsidized housing. It's not low-income housing, but it's subsidized. So they got that to rehab that building. There are about 54 units in it. Around 48 of them are subsidized, and that's kind of how they afforded that project. But they've since, that group and other configurations of it have acquired everything on that block and across the street on the west side of Pennsylvania Street. And the city has been very forthcoming in supporting them as a project to re-brick the street and the north and the east and west running streets on either side, lighting, burying cables. It's been quite an amazing thing to see. There are artist studios there. There's a plan for a gallery space. There's a plan for a restaurant. Tony Kresnick has been the leader of Landmark Development, which is doing it, but he has other partners. He's the most visible face of it in Lawrence. Phil?
You mentioned, I had forgotten about the dance troupe that was there. How does that fall into the idea that you don't need the arts center money?
Yeah, that dance company was the 940 Dance Company, and it was a victim of not making money. It's a victim of our inability to sustain it. What it meant is that we had, I think, 5 or 7 dancers on staff. They were paid to rehearse, and back in the day when schools were paying performing artists to come and do workshops and perform in auditoriums, we had 2 things happening at the Art Center. One was the Seem-to-Be Players, which made its money, or it didn't make money, but it paid for gas. and some artists' salaries to go to schools to perform. And then schools have basically stopped bringing in performing artists. Or they no longer have money to bus kids in to see performing arts during the day, but sometimes this happens at the Lead Center. So the arts center used to support seem to be players that way by contracts with school districts around the region, and the same with the 940 Dance Company. I mean, there's definitely some victims to that. Yeah.
You mentioned the third part, which is the
Yes.
former German community building.
Yes.
And it's just around the
Yes.
corner from your place. What do you see as the future of that building?
Well, we've talked to Dennis Brown about it quite a bit. As you all probably know, it was a gym and a beer hall, and you may want to chime in more. But it had as its origin a public use, and the Lawrence Preservation Alliance is committed to keeping it as a public use. We look for places for artists to live and work, and we were interested in it for that purpose. But LPA wants to keep it open, so they're still looking at those avenues now.
You know, we just had a talk about that at the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association Monday, from the people who are really pushing to get funding for it and turn it into a community center. have events there, have dances there, have meetings, make it a meeting hall for the community.
CJ?
Oh, I think my question was answered. But, okay, I do have one question about, what is the plan for the Lawrence Arts Center to expand south of 34 now? And what is the timeline for that happening?
Good. CJ asked, what is the plan for our expansion to the south, and what is the timeline? About 6 or 9 months ago, we entered into an agreement with the City of Lawrence and the Salvation Army to acquire the property that's south of the Art Center. They're the equivalent of 3 lots. 1 is vacant, and 2 have the Salvation Army building on them. As you probably know, the Salvation Army has acquired property south and east, and it is their plan and their national headquarters plan for them to move from downtown to this property. They're not a shelter anymore. They're more of a daytime services place, and they would like to do it in a different location. The building they're in has a lot of structural problems. There's a roof problem, it has a black mold problem. They have estimates to fix it, but it seems impossible, and so they're planning to move. So they've agreed to sell that land to the city, who would then own it as they own our current land, but it would belong to the Art Center. So we would curate it and run it. Last week, we entered into an agreement, a short-term agreement with the Salvation Army to take the green space that's there now, that property just south of us. So within a month or 2, you should see that will be fenced off, and that will be outdoor space for our preschoolers, which we desperately need. It's just, I mean, if you know Linda Raymond, who runs the preschool, you couldn't be happier for a person. She's so thrilled to have kids using that space outdoors. But also, if the Salvation Army ever has kid programs, they can use that green space too. So that's a really good development. I think the Salvation Army is probably 3 or 4 years away from realizing their plans anyway. They have young leadership. I don't know if they have a new board chair right now, but it's their clear intention to move. When that happens, the Art Center will go through all the normal processes of review after we have a plan, which we do not yet have. I mean, there's a vision of it that would be all green space. There's a vision of it that have a structure for artist studios and living space. There's a vision of it that would have, like a green roof that people could go up on, showing films outside. But whatever it is, it will be very porous. The flaw with the building is that it's got a very kind of stiff back to the neighborhood. And so
is the plan to use that building or to destroy it?
No. Well, we'd have to. The Salvation Army seems to think it's impossible to use. We've had some thoughts about using it, especially the oldest part of it, but we'd have to go through all the steps probably necessary to pull something
I
up.
sure hope that these maps are being made available at least through our tourist center.
That is almost just hot off the press of the Lawrence Art Center, and
I can
so
feel the heat on it.
it is not yet. if there's going to be an article about it in the paper, you know, I just think every chance you get to mention cultural district, walkability, do it. And it begins to be kind of in the water and in the way people think. Yeah.
I have an announcement I think that fits very nicely with what you've been talking about. I'd like to invite you all to an event. It's on the 26th of April. I'd like to invite you all to an event. It's on the 25th of April, which is a Thursday. It'll take place from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Union Pacific, Visitor Center Depot. In this event, we'll be inviting Brad Anderson. He's the Executive Director of the Salina Arts and Humanities Department for the city. I don't know if any of you are aware, but the Lawrence Cultural Arts Commission has been working towards creating a position in the city, a paid position, to do the kind of work that Susan's talking about, to bring the arts and cultural organizations in Lawrence together, to have the city create a plan for the arts and humanities and culture in the city. And so we're bringing Brad, and this has actually been initiated by the Lawrence Arts Roundtable. We're bringing Brad in to talk about how successful this has been in Salina and how Salina has done this. So if you're free that Thursday evening, we would sure love to have you join us. What are the times?
My name is Amanda Martin Hammond. I work at the Spencer Museum of Art, and I'm currently the chair of the Lawrence Arts Roundtable.
What were the times again?
6 o'clock
Okay.
to 8 o'clock at the Union Pacific Depot. Right. The Cultural Arts Commission has representatives on the task force, which the mayor kicked off last night, and will be, of course, integrally involved in this. That's the body that made the recommendation to the city about the cultural district, and continues to ask the city, although I don't think it was in this time, for a position to oversee what's happening here. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.